Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. Today we remember Travis Stimeling. The author, musician, and educator left a deep mark on Appalachian culture and the people who practice and document it.
They were my academic papa. I know that they played that role for a lot of other people. A lot of my close friends, we were all mentees of Travis at some point.
And grab your dancing shoes and learn about a movement to make square dance calling more inclusive.
An invitation to callers to simply get out of the habit of saying, swing her, or like, gents to the center. Is there ways that I can just slightly adapt it and it becomes a little bit more warm?
Plus, it's not just you. There are more deer than ever these days. A writer explores the long, complicated entwinement of people and our wild kin.
We tend to associate them with wilderness and deep forests and kind of untouched lands. And in fact, their best habitat is on the edges.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. Travis Stimeling carried the torch for bluegrass and traditional music in Appalachia. It was a shock when the author, musician, and West Virginia University professor died abruptly in November at the age of 43. News of their passing prompted an outpouring of remembrances from colleagues, former students, and friends. Some shared their stories with Folkways reporter Zach Harold, who brings us this.
Sophia Enriquez didn't know it at the time, but one music history class in her freshman year of college would change the entire direction of her life. It was 2013, and the music department at West Virginia University was looking to hire another professor. As part of the interview process, the university wanted finalists for the position to teach a sample lecture, a job talk in academic lingo.
So I was in the guinea pig class that they gave their job talk to.
And in walked Travis Stimeling. Stimeling had grown up playing guitar in church as a child in Buchanan, West Virginia. They then went on to study trombone in college. That eventually led to a Ph.D. in musicology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a teaching gig at Millikan University in Illinois. Now Stimeling was looking to come back home.
They gave a job talk for a music history class and talked about country music and Taylor Swift, and that had everyone so excited. So yeah, that's how I met Travis.
Stimeling, who used they/them pronouns, got the job. It was the beginning of what would be an extremely fruitful period, both for Stimeling and WVU's music program. Over the next decade, Stimeling established Appalachian music and Appalachian studies minors at the university. They published reams of articles and a shelf full of books. That includes co-authoring the autobiography of legendary session musician Charlie McCoy and compiling a book of interviews with modern West Virginia songwriters.
Well, here in West Virginia, we have great songwriters too, right? And so part of the motivation for the book was to kind of push back against Texas and its claim to have songwriting just completely covered. Because I think we do a really good job there.
That's Stimeling in 2019, talking about the songwriter book with Elliot Parker of the Armstrong Neighborhood Channel. All these books and articles established Stimeling as a leading scholar in the study of traditional Appalachian music. But of course, Stimeling wasn't just a scholar. They were a musician. So in addition to their academic pursuits, they founded the WVU Bluegrass and Old Time Band.
There is a time for love and laughter. The days will pass like summer storms.
Enriquez joined the band in her junior year. Though she originally came to WVU to study orchestral trumpet, she caught the bluegrass bug from some friends.
I just walked right into Travis's office one day and said, I think I want to do this. And they said, okay, well, sing me something.
Enriquez didn't really consider herself a singer, but soon she was belting the old Flatt and Scruggs tune, Rollin' in My Sweet Baby's Arms, with Stimeling backing her up on flat-top guitar.
And so then they're like, okay, you're in.
They say, have faith in Jesus, they say, have faith in...
That's Enriquez with a couple of her bandmates on a record Stimeling produced of songs by Wyoming County songwriter Shirley Stewart Burns. But Stimeling didn't just help Enriquez find her voice on stage. She was nearing the end of her undergrad, unsure what to do next. But one day Stimeling sat her down and laid out the options.
If you take this path, here's what I see. If you take this path, here's what I see. And then they said, but I don't think you realize that you would actually be really great at doing what I do.
Enriquez went on to earn a PhD in ethnomusicology. On the day she received her doctorate, she also got a voicemail from Stimeling.
Dr. Enriquez, this is Dr. Stimeling calling on important doctor business. But really, congratulations. I'm just so dang proud of you. I thought I would call and wish it to you directly. Looking forward to celebrating with you next time we're together. Talk to you soon. Bye.
They always called me they were my academic papa. I know that they played that role for a lot of other people. A lot of my close friends, we were all mentees of Travis at some point.
Another of Stimeling's many academic youngins was Mary Lynchide. She grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, the child of two classical musicians. Lynchide began studying classical violin at the age of 5, but she fell in love with old-time and bluegrass music as a tween. In 8th grade, she made a fateful trip to WVU's Mountain Lair Student Union to see the University Bluegrass Band perform.
So, graduated high school, applied to WVU. That's the only school I applied for because I knew I didn't want to leave. I wanted to be in the Bluegrass Band. That was like one of my top reasons for going.
Lynchide ended up in Stimeling's Appalachian Music and Appalachian Studies minors. She joined the Bluegrass Band. And like Enriquez, it was in that band that Lynchide found her voice.
You turned up like the leaves before the rain.
Travis actually got me singing. Like, before college, I would never sing, especially in public. Like, I went to church and everything. I lip sang. I would not sing. I don't know why, but maybe it was an insecurity thing, but Travis was like, if you're going to be in the Bluegrass Band, everybody has to sing.
She started writing songs, compiling enough to record her debut album in 2022. Stimeling produced that project and played and sang on several tracks.
I'll be here when the winter gets too cold. I'll be here when you're alone and you need a hand to hold. I'll be here.
And Travis was always my first listener, my first reader of anything.
Lynchide and Stimeling became close friends and bandmates outside the university, first performing in a square dance group together. They recently started playing gigs as a duo and had their first big performance last summer at Jerry Run Summer Theater in Webster County.
I'm so glad we got to do that. It was kind of like a last-minute thing because the band that they had scheduled canceled, and we were able to go down and do a duo show, which is like our first like real duo show. And Travis just seemed like they were finally free in their music and ready to like take off with that and go in a whole other direction with their life. And they were excited. They were really excited about this next phase of their life.
Stimeling and Lynchide were set to go into the studio to record a duet album, but ended up postponing the session at the last minute. Then, just a week later, Stimeling was gone. They died unexpectedly in their home on November 14th, 2023. Now, instead of recording an album, Lynchide was left to organize a memorial service. She knew she'd need to include Jenny Hawker on the set list for that memorial. Hawker is an expert in the old-time primitive Baptist style of singing, so Lynchide asked her to lead the crowd in Amazing Grace, sung in the old call-and-response style of the primitive Baptists.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Hawker doesn't remember exactly how she and Stimeling became friends.
I don't know. Our paths keep crossing.
Stimeling became fascinated by Hawker's style of singing, and the two were beginning a formal apprenticeship.
And we were going, I think it was December the 10th. We were supposed to go down to a Primitive Baptist church in Clay County and just listen.
As they dove into the repertoire of the Primitive Baptist Church, Hawker and Stimeling came to make a vow. Whichever of them died first, The other would sing the hymn, Dear Friends Farewell, at the funeral.
Dear friends, farewell, I do you tell, since you and I must part. You go away and here I stay, but still we're joined in heart. It's just, the words are just perfect.
Hawker didn't think about that promise as Linshad was preparing the memorial service. She never imagined she'd have to keep her end of the bargain. She assumed it would be Stimeling singing at her funeral. But as she sat there, listening as the WVU Bluegrass Band finished up their set, with songs like Will the Circle Be Unbroken and other country classics that Stimeling loved, Hawker remembered. And she climbed back on stage, stepped to the mic, and kept her promise to her friend.
Dear friends, farewell, I do you tell, since you and I must part. I go away, and here you stay, but still we're joined in heart.
Friends at Appalachia, I'm Zach Harold.
To me has been most free, your conversation sweet.
Travis Stimeling spoke with Inside Appalachia a couple of times. We'll link both of those stories on our website. Calling a square dance is tricky business. The skill has been handed down for generations, and some of the language callers use is a little old-fashioned. A growing number of square dance callers are updating that language. They say some simple changes to the words callers use will help keep the tradition alive and strong. Folkways reporter Lydia Warren has the story.
It's a warm July night in Elkins, West Virginia, and 20 couples are square dancing at an outdoor pavilion. Twinkle lights shine and paper lanterns sway in the warm breeze as a string band plays. This is the Augusta Heritage Center in Elkins, West Virginia, where they've been hosting square dances for decades. 25-year-old artist and Elkins resident Nevada Tribble calls out moves like promenade, join hands, and circle to the left.
Break the circles, form some lines, and lines of three go up and back.
Unlike the square dances you probably did in gym class, Nevada's calls have no gendered language, no ladies and gents, and no swing your girl, and this is on purpose. Before she learned to call square dances, Nevada grew up dancing in Elkins.
We always had the kind of dance scene where like everybody dances with everybody, like you change partners after every dance, regardless of like who you came with. And I think that was like also a part that made it really inviting and inclusive, because it just like didn't really matter who you were dancing with or any of that.
Nevada noticed that the language of the calls didn't necessarily reflect the people on the dance floor. Sometimes there would be an uneven ratio of women to men on the floor, and using ladies and gents just didn't make sense. Some folks might want to dance with the same gender partner, whether it's a spouse, a friend, or a kid. And, of course, there might be dancers who don't identify with being called either a lady or a gent. Nevada thought everyone would feel welcome if callers used gender-free language. And making sure there are calls any gender can dance to keeps the dance floor full. Nevada is part of a new wave of callers in the Appalachian square dance scene who are trying to make dances more welcoming. They're sharing their new calls with each other in a zine called Circle Up.
And swing your own, now your own, everybody swing your own.
Nevada wrote this call for Circle Up. The zine is a small, glossy booklet with handwritten and illustrated instructions on how to call 17 gender-free square dances, as well as some non-touching and seated dances for participants who prefer or need these accommodations.
This zine just kind of feels like it's a large invite. It's like, here are some people that have some ideas.
That's Becky Hill, a professional dancer who became a caller when she lived in Elkins. She mentored Nevada and curated the Circle Up zine.
We're not claiming to be experts. We're not claiming to be the only way forward. We are just the ones that have decided to start this conversation and to be a little bit more loud about that.
For Becky, creating a welcoming space is just a matter of bringing out aspects of the tradition that are already present.
Like, you don't have to change chase the rabbit, chase the squirrel. We don't have to change birdie in the cage. We don't have to change all these things. It's just like providing options and invitation to callers to just think about, like, oh, can I just simply get out of the habit of saying swing her, or like, gents to the center. Is there ways that I can just slightly adapt it and it becomes a little bit more warm?
Of course, making square dances more welcoming is about more than just gender and language. It's also about race.
The square dance community, or like the old-time traditional music community, is pretty white.
That's musician, dancer, and community organizer Ian Tran, who splits her time between Floyd, Virginia, and Brooklyn, New York. Ian visited Elkins for the Augusta Heritage Center's Old Time Music Week.
The music does not come from entirely white roots. The banjo comes from Africa. There are fiddles in Africa also. The people in the community are still overwhelmingly white.
Ian says she did a survey of people in the traditional music and dance scene and found that some people did feel unwelcome at jams, dances, and festivals. So she formed a group to take action.
The makeup is people of color, people with disabilities, trans people. There's also an indigenous person in the group, and there's a white male middle-aged organizer also.
This group made a set of community principles to create more welcoming spaces in the scene. They included guidelines like not using slurs and listening to others. The principles were illustrated and printed into a poster, and that poster is tucked into Circle Up.
Our hope is really that people will take the principles, use what's valuable to them, and use them in their own communities. Like, bring them to your local square dance and stick them on the wall, or bring them to your local, folk school and stick them on the wall, or your event, or if you have a camp at Clifftop or at Galax or whatever festival you go to, and you can just clip it up to your campsite to say, like, this 10 by 10 space is my safer space that I'm welcoming people into. And these are the principles that we are going to try to stick by in order to make this a more welcoming community.
Ian, Becky, and Nevada say they're excited to see the tradition become more welcoming and, in turn, grow into a space where even more people feel at home on the dance floor. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Lydia Warren in Elkins, West Virginia.
Those first two stories are part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. You can find dozens more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. Later in the show, why you're more likely to find a deer in your neighborhood than you are in the deep woods. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
Medicaid provides health coverage for more than 90 million Americans. That number grew as states added protections to make sure people didn't lose coverage during the COVID pandemic. Now states are dismantling those continuous coverage policies, and everyone has to reapply to determine their eligibility. In a new episode of Us and Them, host Trey Kay talked with Deidre Toppings. Medicaid covered her when her headaches began 8 years ago. But that changed.
I don't like going unless I absolutely have to. So I just suffered. I kept getting diagnosed with just chronic migraines, and they tried multiple different medications to help with the migraines, but nothing was working. So then that's when they suggested the further testing with the MRIs and the CAT scans to see what else was going on.
Testing showed a cranial malformation that required an operation. Surgeons needed to remove a piece of her skull to give her brain more space. It's a major procedure, brain surgery.
And then that decompression surgery failed. The base of my brain is outside of my skull again, but I'm not able to take that much time off, nor money-wise, to have another surgery. It fluctuates because it all depends on like how the base of your brain is setting at that point with the spinal fluid flowing around it. So if you're having a bad day and your spinal fluid is not flowing, you have more symptoms and they're more severe. And most of the time when you have those severe symptoms, you're stuck at home because you just can't function. We were very thankful for Medicaid because it would pay for what the 20% that our insurance wouldn't cover. Just medication and stuff because, I mean, copays on medicine, they range from anywhere from $5 to some are in the thousands of dollars, even with a copay.
Eventually, Deidre and her husband decided they needed more income. So she got a job. But then, when COVID struck, she got laid off and found herself back on Medicaid. In terms of health care, she says that actually turned out well. She could go to a doctor without having to worry about a huge bill. And her kids were covered too.
It's not something that I want to rely on, but it was nice to have that extra help so that we wouldn't have to take away essentially from our kids because the money that we have to put out for that's coming from groceries or our bills or, something because we don't make a whole lot of money.
Now, we all know what happened next. The pandemic emergency ends, and now Deidre has two new challenges. First, in West Virginia, state employees get fined if they don't use their employer-based health insurance. And second, Deidre and her husband are both working, so they don't qualify for Medicaid anymore, even if the school district's insurance doesn't cover her specific needs like Medicaid did.
We have to budget it, and like some months if we don't have doctor's appointments or anything planned, then, we're able to really know what we're going to have to spend. Of course, we put back every paycheck kind of a savings account. That way, if an emergency does happen, we have a little bit. It might not be enough to cover what we need, but we have a little bit put back to help with that emergency.
Deidre is the only member of her family whose health needs monitoring. She's supposed to get 2 MRIs a year. With her current plan, she pays $900 a pop. Do you have somebody who helps you navigate your healthcare and your healthcare coverage? Or is that something that you basically navigate all on your own, you and your husband?
No, we just do it all on our own. It's not something that is fun to think about. I feel like we're being punished because we want to work and we want to better our lives and make sure our children have what they need.
That's from the latest Us and Them. The episode is called Navigating Post-Pandemic Medicaid. To hear the rest of the episode, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Us and Them is supported by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. Few animals are as polarizing as the white-tailed deer. They're graceful and majestic and kind of cool to see up close, but they can also ravage gardens, and drivers hit countless deer every year. Yet, there seem to be more deer than ever. Erica Hauser is the author of The Age of Deer, Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors. Producer Bill Lynch spoke with Hauser.
Erica, start with your earliest memories of deer. When can you first remember encountering a deer?
I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. One of my earliest memories of deer, I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was over at a friend's house. We were playing in her yard. It was late fall, deer hunting season, and I remember seeing her dad and another guy emerging from the woods and dragging a deer that they had just shot. And they were pretty far away. We were looking down a power line cut, so we could see them a long way off. And in my memory, they're still very far away. I don't think we waited for them to make it back to the yard with the deer. I think we went inside before they got there. So it's not a close range image of the deer that has stuck with me, but it is very vivid. I do remember that well, and it made some kind of impression on me. Although there must have been lots of live deer that were around when I was growing up, I don't really have memories of living ones. I remember that one, and I remember seeing, trophy heads in people's houses. That's what has stuck with me.
Your background, book bio mentions that you're a poet, journalist.
Mm-hmm.
You've covered culture and environmental issues, and you're also a teacher. So how did you get to a book about deer, especially one that, like this one, which isn't exactly a hunting guide or even a scientific treatment? It's a very broad kind of book.
Right. I hope nobody will look to this book for hunting advice. They will be disappointed. But I came to the topic kind of very slowly and gradually. Didn't come to me in a flash or anything like that. But I did have those early memories of deer and just kind of an awareness that they're always around. They're always kind of at the edges. And I had gotten, as an adult, as I was kind of becoming a writer, I had gotten really interested in questions about nature and humans and what we even mean when we use that word nature. What are we saying when we say that something is natural? And at some point I realized that deer would be a really good topic for digging into some of those questions. For most of us in the eastern U.S., they're the only large wild animal that we're likely to see in our daily lives. So that makes them really significant, just for that fact alone. And we do have, as I started to research and dig into it, I realized the extent of the historical relationship that we have with them. Our two species have been really intertwined and entangled with each other for thousands and thousands of years. So there's just a very profound connection that we have with them, and their place in our contemporary world is very complex, kind of like a hallway with many doors. You open a door and there's kind of a whole room in there. And so it was a very, very fun process to research this.
Were we always so parallel and adjacent? Were they always this close to us?
I would say probably not, but they are edge creatures. We tend to associate them with wilderness and deep forests and kind of untouched lands. And in fact, their best habitat is on the edges. So Native Americans, for example, used to do controlled burns in order to kind of create clearings. And the low, brushy vegetation that grows back from that is great deer food. So they were doing that to attract deer and sort of create habitat for them. In our contemporary world, we have created edges everywhere. And that's, kind of paradoxically, that's why deer can thrive so well among us in our cities and our suburbs. They find lots of food where, let's say, a park meets the woods, or along roadsides, or, obviously in our backyards. I doubt that historically people were living this close to such numbers of deer, but they have always been, I think, kind of at the edges of our world.
Where do you start with something as big as this? I mean, in some ways, to me, it felt like unraveling a sweater. You're pulling a string and it just sort of comes loose. But yeah, where do you start?
Yeah, that's a good metaphor for it, unraveling the sweater. Well, I started by, one of the first things I tried to research was deer in mythology, and I thought, I bet I'll find a couple of interesting old tales and myths about deer, and I just found there were so many, and they were such a presence in different mythologies from around the world and in ancient art. I also, early on, started some news alerts on deer and a couple of other terms. So, I still have them on. So every day I'm still getting this steady stream of emails about, deer in our contemporary world and the different roles that they play and some of the ways that they tend to sort of show up over and over again in our world. They're victims that we like to save from terrible predicaments. They're also pests who eat our gardens. They sometimes, accidentally end up in a building or a parking garage, things like that. So there are these kind of recurring situations that happen with them. And I started to get a sense of these different roles that they play and how, what each of those kind of says about how we see them.
With doing this book, did it change anything, how you looked at how other animals and how we're adjacent with or parallel to, I guess, to nature?
Yeah, I think a lot of things changed for me during the writing of the book. I mean, one of the big stories that the book tells is about the decline and then the recovery of deer populations through history. And that's not a story that most people are aware of, I don't think. A lot of us know about what happened with bison, which is similar, that they were, nearly wiped out and then they recovered somewhat. With deer, it's a really similar story, but we just have largely forgotten it. And part of that story is about the deliberate restocking of deer in many states. This was in the early 20th century. The conservation movement was getting started, and there were various things that were done to try to help deer recover because they had actually become locally extirpated in many places, and there were entire states that had no deer at all. It's so hard for us to picture that now, but that was the situation. So commercial hunting was outlawed. That made a big difference for them, but also they were restocked and moved from one place to another, one state to another, to rebuild those populations. And I think when I learned about that history, to go back to, again, those questions of what is natural, that just sort of permanently changed the way I see them. They're a native animal, of course, but at what point do you say, this is a natural or an artificial population when it's been so deeply impacted by humans?
Brings up, I guess, a question that's more local with restocking deer in certain states. Could this a warning about restocking certain populations? I think of in West Virginia, we're restocking elk. Possible in the attempt to restock, we created an entire second species, kind of like deer, that have become, I don't want to say a nuisance, except when it comes to my garden.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like there's a lot more around than when I was a boy.
Yeah, and there probably are. I mean, the question of their population numbers is very complex and it's contentious. And I think it's always really tricky when we introduce species or try to control species. That always seems to have unintended consequences. I'm thinking about things like kudzu. Somebody thought that was a great idea at one point too. And on the other hand, elk are a species that are, again, native here. So there's a real case to be made that they belong in this ecosystem.
You've been doing readings and appearances. You do question and answer sessions. What kind of questions are people asking?
Lots of people want to know more about chronic wasting disease, which is a very serious problem for all the members of the deer family, so that includes elk and moose. Chronic wasting disease is a neurological disease. It's always fatal, and there's currently no treatment or cure. And it's not caused by a virus or a bacteria. It's caused by a misfolded protein called a prion. And this infects animals when it is ingested or inhaled. So deer can communicate this disease to each other. And the really awful thing about it is that it can stay in the soil for quite a long time, like up to 10 years, and be even taken up by plants, which then, if a deer consumes that plant, it can contract the disease. Chronic wasting disease, we've only known it to be around since the late 60s, and it's now spread to more than half of the states in the U.S. It was recently found in Yellowstone National Park, which, again, a lot of people think of elk when they think of Yellowstone, but the elk there are vulnerable to this, and so it's a real problem, and it's not known at this point ever to have passed to a human, but it is closely related to mad cow disease, which we know can and has passed to humans. So it's very worrisome, and I find people have been asking a lot of questions about that.
What's next?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I would like to do more projects of this kind, and I do want to keep digging into those same big questions about people and nature, and There's a chapter in this book called Should Not Be, and that's based on those incidents when deer end up in human spaces and buildings. And there's an interview with a guy who's a security guard in North Carolina in a courthouse, and he was sitting there at his post one day and a buck crashed through the glass door and into the courthouse, and he and another guard had to, tackle and subdue the deer. So it's this whole wild story, and there's lots of stories about that or similar to that. I got very interested in that notion of species that are out of place somehow or not where they're supposed to be. I mentioned kudzu also. That's another great example of a species that, was brought here from a different continent and has become a big part of the habitat here. And so I'd like to do something that tells some of those stories about plant and animal species that are, for one reason or another, not in the right place. And that's kind of in quotations.
The book is The Age of Deer, Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors by Erica Hauser. Erica, thanks a lot.
Thanks so much for having me.
Some watersheds, like the Chesapeake Bay, have long-term restoration plans and federal funding to support them. Not so for the Ohio River. Now, a new report from the Ohio River Basin Alliance and the National Wildlife Federation is calling for that to change. Jordan Lubecken is director of the National Wildlife Federation's Ohio River Restoration Program. The Allegheny Front's Julie Grant spoke with him about the 31 listening sessions in 14 states that provided information for that report.
We really believe that one tenet of our democracy is that communities and people impacted by a problem deserve to have a say in the solution. So we went to those communities, big and small, to say, like, hey, what are some problems that we want to tackle? We want to infuse those and center those and prioritize those in this big, bold restoration plan.
What were some of the major concerns you heard?
We see people who are well aware of things like toxic pollution from days past, but also emerging contamination from things like toxic PFAS. Not too long ago, about 600 miles of river were essentially blanketed by a toxic algal bloom. There are still do not swim advisories. There are people in this region that still don't have access to water. They live next to a Superfund site that's been lingering for decades, and those are some of the most toxic sites in the country. So people see that while we've made progress over the decades, there are a lot of serious threats.
A couple of other issues the report highlighted were pollution issues from farming and also concerns about climate change and increased flooding.
In every community we went to, you bring up flooding, everyone raises their hand. They can tell you about a specific year or a specific event. I think there's widespread awareness that these sort of intense rain events in the spring are getting worse and that we need to be doing something about it. On the positive side about flooding, I think there's a lot of awareness about so-called nature-based infrastructure, how we can restore natural features of the environment, whether it's parks or wetlands or forests, so that the ground absorbs that rainwater and stormwater before it overwhelms stormwater systems. I think the second issue you bring up, we've made a lot of strides with agriculture and productivity. However, there is, as animal waste and fertilizers run off of farm fields during heavy rains and overwhelm systems, they can create toxic algal blooms. The good news there is people know about agriculture programs and farm conservation programs that pay farmers to take specific actions so they can protect soil quality and water quality. People see a lot of problems, but they also are aware of solutions. And I think what this report gets at the end of the day, we want this report to be leading to solutions that improve the water quality of this region writ large for people in cities and towns alike.
I mean, you mentioned a few things, but what do people want done?
Well, we talk about sort of what are the new economies? What are the new job opportunities? And the water restoration economy is one of those. Jobs that include engineering, excavation and building and taking down dams. But we're also talking about high tech. We're also talking about biotech. We're also talking about superconductors. We're talking about a lot of industries that need pure, clean water to do what they need to do. So I think when we talk about restoring our waters and restoring our communities and restoring our health, we're also talking about restoring our local economies and our workforce. And this was probably one of the most visceral things that they said is like, we want those jobs going to local workers, going to local businesses and local contractors. And we want the job training and workforce development so that we can make that happen.
The Allegheny Front is based in Pittsburgh and reports regional environmental news. For a link, visit our website. wvpublic.org. Appalachia is home to a couple of varieties of northern flying squirrels, the Carolina northern flying squirrel and the West Virginia northern flying squirrel. Both are on the endangered species list. In Pennsylvania, WVIA's Haley O'Brien joined a group from the Wildlands Conservancy to go searching for flying squirrels in the Poconos. She has this story.
On a cold Saturday morning, a group gathered in the Poconos to look for a specific rodent, the northern flying squirrel. Renee Swayzer is an environmental educator for the Wildlands Conservancy. She guided a group of about 15 people to check the nesting boxes at Thomas Darling Preserve near Blakesley. The boxes were placed on trees about 20 feet high. To check them, Swayzer climbs a ladder and bangs on the box. She covers the small opening in the box with a gallon-sized plastic bag to catch the squirrels. Oh my God. After checking a few boxes to no avail, there were 3 snuggled up in one box. The clear baggie allows Swayzer to hold the rodent safely while getting a good look at it to determine whether it's a northern flying squirrel or a southern flying squirrel.
This is a southern, but still cool. Southern flying squirrels are typically the ones that a lot of people, like if they have cabins in the Poconos, or they're the ones that you find like in your attic.
The northern flying squirrels are an endangered species.
We want to try to prove that we have northern flying squirrels here, because if we can show that we have them here, we can get in touch with the Game Commission and they can kind of help us come up with a game plan on how to better manage the habitat.
So it was a bit of a bummer not to see any northern flying squirrels that day. But the group was happy to see that southern flying squirrels are just as cute.
It was amazing.
Fantastic.
Great. I'm Haley O'Brien.
150 years ago, American chestnut trees provided lumber and food for people and animals throughout the eastern U.S. Then, a fungus nearly wiped them out. The chestnut trees most of us are familiar with now are Chinese chestnut trees, which are resistant to the blight. Researchers have been working to bring back the American chestnut, but a program to genetically modify the tree hit a snag last year. As Radio IQ's Roxy Todd reports, this has left chestnut fans wondering what's next.
A few miles from Abingdon in southwest Virginia, tens of thousands of chestnut trees are growing in an orchard surrounded by hilly cow pastures. Most of these trees are young, but they're descended from chestnut seedlings that researchers bred 100 years ago.
With each successive generation, you're trying to retain as much resistance as possible.
Vasily Lakoba is director of research with the American Chestnut Foundation and heads up the foundation's first and largest research orchards here in Meadowview. A groundhog scurries in the grass as we head over to look at one tree, a hybrid Chinese and American chestnut.
Well, when we say hybrids, we mean that the genetics of the two species become mixed.
This isn't genetic modification done in a lab. This is someone nudging the tree along.
When you as a person take pollen from one tree that you've collected and you put it on the female flowers of another tree.
Scientists have been trying to help restore chestnuts this way since the early 1900s. Researchers in New York, meanwhile, have been working on something entirely different, a genetically modified American chestnut called Darling 58. They found a way to insert a gene from wheat into an American chestnut, supposedly making it resistant to the blight. But recently, the American Chestnut Foundation announced they're no longer supporting the Darling GMO project.
We have evidence that the trees are not performing well in the field.
Sarah Fern Fitzsimmons is with the American Chestnut Foundation. She says the GMO trees are growing slowly and don't appear to resist the blight after a year. They also discovered a genetic deficiency. The Darling trees have 2 missing genes that chestnuts need to be healthy. The wheat gene, she says, replaced them. This could explain why the Darling trees have stunted growth. Andy Newhouse disagrees.
The Darling chestnuts are still the most promising option we have.
He's the director of the Chestnut Project at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, where researchers developed the Darling line of chestnuts.
We're moving forward. We're studying the trees. We're working to improve them.
Newhouse's team has applied to the United States Department of Agriculture for permission to release their GMO trees. The USDA could make a decision this year. Meanwhile, other genetic researchers here in Virginia are working to better understand the specific genes that help some chestnut trees resist the blight. Inside a lab on Virginia Tech's campus, researcher Amy Bruner points to dozens of seedlings sprouting in tiny plastic boxes. Grow lights give the room an almost X-Files vibe.
This is actually really cool.
These seedlings were recently sprouted from nuts collected on orchards in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Bruner says the future of this science could include both genetic modification as well as traditional hybrid breeding.
Compared to crops, the amount of researchers that are focused on forest trees using the type of research we do, the molecular genetics and genomics, is relatively small.
Her colleague, John McDowell, is also hoping to study the genetic sequence of the fungus that causes blight, which could help restore American chestnuts back to the forests.
They used to be keystone species in the eastern forests. They were great sources of timber and food. They underpinned a lot of local economies.
Back on the Meadowview orchard, Lacoba points to another young hybrid chestnut tree that shows promise. It's tall and straight, and its nuts look similar to American chestnuts. And after 15 years, it appears to be fighting off blight. So at this point, it's not perfect, it's not the best ideal, but it's getting much closer.
Exactly.
Genetic research can speed up the process, but Lacoba says it may take 100 more years for scientists to get an ideal tree that will survive in the wild. He says one single solution won't solve it. It will take different breeding methods and scientists across the country to return chestnuts back to the forests. In Meadowview, I'm Roxy Todd.
The Wildlife Center of Virginia in Waynesboro is recognized around the world for its teaching and research hospital. Ed Clark is the Wildlife Center's co-founder and president. In January, Clark announced plans to retire after more than 4 decades as the Wildlife Center's leader. WMRA's Randy B. Hagee reports.
Ed Clark has long been a force of and for nature, steering the Wildlife Center from its infancy through 4 decades of meteoric growth. His enthusiasm draws people in, whether he's releasing an eagle in Shenandoah County,
1, 2, 3. Go, bird. Wow.
or hosting television shows such as VPM's Untamed.
Now we understand that the cave is far more important, not just as a tourist attraction, but as a major component of the ecosystem and of the life cycle of the bat.
Ed is absolutely a conservation giant.
Ryan Brown, the executive director of the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, has worked with Clark for more than 15 years.
He's a name that everyone across this state knows and respects for the work that he does, for the wonderful person that he is, and most of all for his passion.
Earlier this month, 72-year-old Clark announced his retirement after leading the teaching hospital and public outreach organization for 41 years.
Now, I'll still be involved with the Wildlife Center. I'm not retiring from conservation. I'm not retiring from a passion for wildlife.
We sat down for an interview in his office under bookshelves lined with awards, photography books, congressional commendations, and eagle-shaped bourbon decanters. Clark said his love of nature was cultivated early on by his Uncle Barney on 52 forested acres in Pennsylvania.
We would literally just roam the woods and play and build forts and catch crayfish in the creek and do that sort of thing. And so I was just steeped in an outdoor tradition.
He grew up in Rappahannock County, and after graduating from Bridgewater College, taught at the Virginia School for the Deaf and the Blind for 5 years. Then, in 1979, he became the first executive director of what is now the Virginia Conservation Network.
Once I got my taste of professional conservation advocacy, the hook was set and the die was cast.
In 1982, he sat down for lunch with his first wife, Nancy Sheffield, and others to discuss how Virginia needed a facility to provide long-term care for injured wildlife. Clark took that as a challenge, and in November of that year, the Wildlife Center of Virginia was officially incorporated. Sheffield, now a retired veterinary technician and professor, co-founded the center and served on its board of directors for 16 years.
At the time, we were living on some property that my parents owned that was originally a horse facility. And so we had a big barn that just had some hay in it and nothing else was going on, and stalls downstairs. And so we were able to convert them into something that was somewhat appropriate for housing wildlife.
After 3 years, and with a $25,000 donation from the Mars family of the Mars Inc. Candy Empire, they expanded to a double-wide trailer in Weir's Cave.
So we started our postdoctoral training program in that double wide. We started our research program in that double wide. We mounted a campaign that resulted in one of the most dangerous agricultural chemicals ever brought on the market to be banned.
Long and fascinating story short, the Wildlife Center and the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries determined that an eagle that was admitted in 1985 had been poisoned by furadan, a common grain pesticide. As Clark and his team tried to report the chemical's effects to the Reagan-era Environmental Protection Agency, they found the manufacturer had falsified tests about its safety. A concerned EPA biologist smuggled documents to Clark, Pentagon Papers style, that showed agency administrators were involved in a cover-up.
There were a lot of heroics back then.
The center moved to its current location, a spacious hospital tucked into the woods just south of Waynesboro, in 1995. Among its many distinctions, it's the only facility in the state authorized to rehabilitate black bears. Each year, they take in orphaned cubs that must be raised properly so that they don't habituate to human contact.
Probably 4 or 5 years ago, we had 21 cubs we were overwintering, and it was a mild winter, so none of them would go to sleep. So we were preparing something in the neighborhood of 200 pounds of bear food per day. And let me just tell you, it put a dent in the grocery budget around here.
Over 4 decades, the center has grown from a 4-volunteer affair to a 36-employee organization that trains wildlife veterinarians from all over the world. Sheffield herself went on to teach students in Colorado who interned there. Clark explained that the center's mission is not fixing broken animals, but teaching the world to care about and for wildlife.
The thing that I find most gratifying about my career here has been the stories I hear from people who say, I never knew, you taught me whatever it was. You taught me not to be afraid of snakes. You taught me not to throw litter on the side of the road because it just attracts wildlife to harm's way.
The board of directors has retained a consultant to find Clark's successor. When it's time for him to migrate, tentatively at the end of March, he'll take on the role of president emeritus. He hopes to have more time for nature photography, fishing, and horseback riding. I'm Randy B. Hagee.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Amethyst Kia, Watch House, John Blissard, Yonder Mountain String Band, and Larry Rader. Bill Lynch is our producer. Xander Alloy is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.